So first we're going to address the slow etude for the all-state excerpts on bass clarinet. The first thing I want to take a look at are the terms that we find in this excerpt. So you'll notice you'll have the marking dolce, you'll also notice the marking poco, and finally the marking espressivo. Before you ever start learning an excerpt, one of the first things you want to do is to take a look at what do those words mean? How are they going to impact your playing and your interpretation? So in the very beginning, the piano dolce, that simply means that we're going to play this opening very sweetly. That's what our dolce marking means. So for the first 8 bars of this melody, we're going to really be looking to play with a really sweet, soft tone. Then when we have the marking poco forte that shows up in bar 8, poco means little. So we're not going to push our full forte volume yet. We're going to start with just a little more push than we had in that opening. And we're going to reserve that final full-bodied forte for the forte espressivo that happens at the beginning of the 3rd line. So those are some of the first things we want to take a look at in this excerpt. The second item that I'd like to take a look at in the excerpt are the markings of the fermatas and the caesuras. I like to play both of these fermatas and caesuras a little bit differently. I take a little less time on the first fermata and a little less time at the caesura before I start the next phrase. Then the second time we have a fermata and a caesura, I like to make those a little bit longer just to differentiate between those two markings in the score. Last but not least, for interpretation at the very end, I like to take a little bit of time going into the final G in the last measure, just to help indicate that the end of the excerpt is coming up. One of the other technical things that we want to address in this particular slow excerpt, the notes are not terribly difficult, but what we really want to try to do is make the most out of the skips. We really want to fill up the sound between the notes on the bottom and the notes on the top in measures 1, 2, 4, 5, 6. We really want to fill up the space between those lower notes and the higher notes. One way we can do that is to play the lower notes a little bit longer and with a little bit more volume to help fill up the space between the two pitches. Another technique I like to use in measure 4, if you're having a hard time crossing over the breaks smoothly with a good sound, one way that you can practice measures 4, 5, and 6 is to actually play those measures without the register key to see how much volume you can get between the low note and the high note. So what that would look like in measures 4, 5, and 6, or sound like, we're going to take the register key off the back and we're going to aim for the low notes here. So here's what that would look like in measure 4, 5, and 6. So we don't ever play with this key here, and that allows us to work on filling up the note sound between that low note and the high note without creating any tension as we're crossing over the break. So when we add the register key back in, we want to keep aiming as if we're trying to play those low notes with no register key. So that's another really good way to practice that particular section and really working on filling up the sound. The breath marks are pretty well written into this. Every time you have an eighth rest, that's where you're going to take your time and really take a great breath before you start the next phrase. So in this excerpt, make sure you're paying attention to the musical markings indicated. Take your time, fill up the space, and really, really play with a variety of sounds and tones from your dolce sound at the beginning to the espressivo sound at the end, and make lots of beautiful music with this slow excerpt. right, we're gonna look at some of the complications that arise in the first fast all-state bass clarinet excerpt. So the first thing I would like to address is breathing. There are, fit in with this excerpt, plenty of eighth note rests. Those are all gonna be good candidates for taking really, really great breaths before we start. But there are a few other places that we're gonna have to add some additional breaths. So starting in bar 9 is this much longer phrase that we're gonna have to break up a little bit. The way that I like to do that is in measure 13, after the first quarter note of that bar, is I'm gonna put a very fast breath before the third eighth note in that measure. And then I'm gonna replicate that same breath note mark that also occurs in measure 21. We're gonna take a breath after the first quarter note in measure 21 as well to align with what we've done in measure 13. So that's how we're gonna break up these sort of two longer phrases. Then every other eighth note rest that you get, we're really gonna use that as an opportunity to take a really great low breath on your instrument before you start the next phrase. Some of the next challenges in this excerpt are the grace notes that occur also in measures 13 and measures 21. In measure 13, grace notes really, really straightforward. We just get to go from an F sharp up to a G, no finger. That one tends to come with no problem. The really tricky one is in measure 21. So when we have this grace note, what looks like over the break from an A natural to a B natural, the fingering that we want to choose to play that grace note B so we don't have to move all of our fingers over the break is we're going to play an A and then we're going to add your top trill key on the right hand side here. That's going to give you that B natural instead of using all of your fingers to cross the break. So we'll use that top trill key to give you that grace note. The next thing that we want to address in this excerpt is that we need to figure out some pinky patterns for ourselves. This occurs in measure 15 and measure 22 when we're crossing over the break. In measure 15, we need to make sure we hit that first B natural in the bar with our left hand pinky. So we're going to be using our inside left hand pinky for that B natural so that we can play the D sharp on the right hand side. So we want to make sure that we hit that pinky pattern correctly with that left hand pinky to start that bar. The other pinky pattern that we have to address is in measure 22, that when we are going over the break at the last two eighth notes of this bar, we've got an A going to a C natural, going to a D sharp. That C natural is going to have to be played on the left-hand side of the instrument, so make sure that you're aiming for that left-hand C key there so that you can play the right-hand D sharp at the end of that bar correctly. One of the other issues to address here is that we have some really big octave jumps on the bass clarinet, and especially going down, that can be challenging. We want to make sure that we're leaving a lot of space in our jaw as we are blowing down to those lower notes so that they can speak evenly and that we're not biting and causing them to squeak down. As we're playing these octaves, this happens in measure 9 is a really great example of this. We want to make sure we're really dropping our jaw nice and low so you can get a big full sound on those low E's. Those octaves jumps continue in measure 11 and 12. We get to do them again in 19 and 17. Anytime you have those octave jumps from the low to the high, really aim your energy towards those low notes and stay nice and open in your jaw to help make those lower notes speak correctly. Finally, you want to just make sure overall in this excerpt, be really careful about staying relaxed. It's not too fast. Be careful not to push the tempo as you go. It can sometimes get very exciting and we start going a little bit faster. Really, really stay relaxed in both your fingers and your air as you're playing through this excerpt. And stay nice and steady. Lots of work with the metronome here can be really, really helpful. And really trying to, again, make sure we're keeping that space in our jaw and we're keeping our air moving forward to help support the tones in this excerpt. The dynamic shaping here is pretty straightforward. The opening starts piano. Starting in bar 5, we really want to push through up to this big forte in measure 7, and we want to make sure that we finish measure 8, the end of that phrase before the repeat, with a big full sound. So don't get softer here, push all the way to the bottom. When we start the next section after the repeat, this too is going to start with a big full forte marking. We want to maintain that forte all the way through. Starting in measure 14, I like to push a little bit more volume-wise, get a little bit louder, and then I want to bring it back a little bit in measure 17 and 18 just to pull the sort of dynamic back. Then when we begin the new excerpt in new phrase in measure 17, we want to make sure I start this section a little bit softer here. And I like to allow some space to grow before the forte that's marked in measure 25. You can come up with your own ideas about how you would like to push and pull dynamics here a little bit. Do something interesting with the music, however it makes you feel. Try to convey some differentiation of dynamic level from measure 17 until measure 25. Do something in here musically that feels interesting to you. Then starting in measure 25, we want to keep that forte. We're going to push all the way through the next 4 bars, staying forte, and we're going to drop to a subito piano, a sudden piano in measure 29, so we can build our final forte to the end. Have lots of fun preparing this excerpt. Work a lot with the metronome here.
Thanks so much for watching this Colorado All-State Prep video. If you have any questions or concerns, please visit music.colostate.edu for more information, including the opportunity to schedule an individual visit with the School of Music, Theater, and Dance. Good luck on your audition.